In October 1964, East German border guards discovered a tunnel running beneath the Berlin Wall. Inside, they found suitcases, abandoned shoes, and evidence that dozens of people had recently crawled through the 145-meter passage to freedom. What they didn't find was the mastermind behind it, a 23-year-old Italian student who'd just pulled off one of the most daring mass escapes in Cold War history. The story begins not with the tunnel, but with a letter. In early 1962, a young man named Luigi Spina received a desperate message from his sister in East Berlin. She was trapped behind the newly constructed Berlin Wall, separated from her family in the West. "Please," she wrote, "help me find a way out. I cannot live like this anymore." Luigi Spina was a physics student at the Free University of West Berlin. He was 21 years old, studying hard, trying to build a normal life in a city divided by concrete and barbed wire. His sister's letter changed everything. The Berlin Wall had been erected in August 1961, dividing the city overnight. In a single day, families were separated, friends torn apart, a city split in two by concrete, wire, and the threat of lethal force. The East German government called it the anti-fascist protection rampart. Everyone else called it a prison wall. By 1962, the wall was already claiming lives. East Germans who tried to climb over were shot by border guards. Those who tried to swim across the Spree River were drowned or shot in the water. Those who tried to ram through checkpoints in vehicles were machine-gunned. The message was clear: escape meant death. But Luigi Spina had an idea that the East German authorities hadn't fully prepared for. What if you didn't go over the wall or through it? What if you went under it? Spina wasn't the first to think of tunneling. Several small tunnel attempts had already been made, with mixed results. Some succeeded in bringing out a handful of people. Others collapsed or were discovered by East German security. But Spina was thinking bigger. He wanted to build a tunnel that could evacuate dozens of people at once, maybe even hundreds. He needed help. Spina recruited other West Berlin students, many of whom also had family trapped in the East. Together, they formed a small group bound by desperation, idealism, and a willingness to risk everything. In April 1962, they began their first tunnel attempt. The initial site was a basement in West Berlin, just meters from the border. The plan was simple in concept, but brutal in execution. Dig straight down to get below the wall's foundation, then tunnel horizontally under the border zone, then dig up on the east side in a location they'd carefully scouted. Simple, except nothing about tunneling under Berlin was simple. The soil was sandy and unstable. Water seeped in constantly from the high water table. They had no proper mining equipment, just shovels, buckets, and improvised wooden supports. None of them had engineering degrees or construction experience. They were students with physics textbooks and desperate hope. The work was exhausting and terrifying. They dug in shifts, one person at a time crawling into the narrow shaft, while others hauled dirt back in buckets. The tunnel was barely wide enough for a person to crawl through, with no room to turn around. If it collapsed, whoever was inside would be buried alive with no chance of rescue. Worse, they had to work in absolute silence. The East German border guards patrolled directly above them, so close they could hear footsteps. One loud sound, one miscalculation, and armed soldiers would come pouring into the basement to arrest them all. After 2 months of digging in June 1962, disaster struck. Water flooded their first tunnel, collapsing it completely. Months of work gone in minutes. Several members of the group quit, convinced it was impossible. Luigi Spina didn't quit. Neither did his core team. They started planning a second tunnel. This time they'd be smarter. They studied geology reports, calculated water table levels, and reinforced their tunnel design with better supports. They found a new starting location, a disused factory bakery on Bernauer Strasse, one of the border streets where buildings sat right on the dividing line. But they needed money. Proper timber for supports, tools, lighting equipment. It all cost more than poor students could afford. That's when an opportunity arrived that would change everything and complicate the operation immensely. A West German television network, NBC's German partner, offered to fund the tunnel in exchange for exclusive rights to film the escape. The students debated fiercely. Would cameras jeopardize security? Would media attention endanger the operation? But the money was too good to refuse. 50,000 Deutsche Marks, enough to buy real equipment and hire additional help. They accepted the deal. NBC would get their documentary. The students would get their tunnel. Work on the second tunnel, later known as Tunnel 29, for the number initially thought to have escaped, began in September 1962. The starting point was the basement of an abandoned bakery at Bernauer Straße 97 in West Berlin. The target was the basement of a building at Schönholzer Straße 7 in East Berlin, approximately 145 meters away. The team expanded to about 40 diggers, working in shifts around the clock. Among them was Joachim Rudolph, a 24-year-old engineering student who became one of the project's key organizers. Also crucial was Hasso Herschel, whose girlfriend was trapped in the East, and who worked with manic determination to reach her. The conditions underground were hellish. The tunnel was only 70 centimeters high and 60 centimeters wide, barely enough space to crawl through on your belly. Summer heat made it feel like an oven. Workers, stripped to their underwear, covered in mud and sweat, hauling bucket after bucket of dirt backward through the narrow passage. They dug by hand with short-handled spades, lying on their stomachs in the darkness. Electric lights ran off generators that had to be kept quiet to avoid detection. Air was pumped in through improvised ventilation shafts, but it was never enough. Men passed out from heat exhaustion and lack of oxygen regularly. The dirt they excavated had to be hidden. Truckloads of it were hauled away at night and dumped in various locations across West Berlin. Any suspicious activity could alert East German informants, and West Berlin was crawling with Stasi agents. The Stasi, East Germany's secret police, were the real threat. They had informants everywhere, including in West Berlin. One careless word in a bar, one suspicious person asking too many questions, and the entire operation could be compromised. Security was obsessive. Diggers were told only what they needed to know. The target address in East Berlin was kept secret from most of the team. Communications with potential escapees in the East were done through coded messages and trusted intermediaries. Everyone understood that one mistake meant prison for them and death for the people trying to escape. NBC's film crew added another layer of complexity. Camera operators and sound technicians crawled through the tunnel filming the work, their equipment taking up precious space. The students tolerated it because NBC's money was funding the operation, but tensions ran high. "They're treating this like entertainment," one digger complained. "This isn't a movie. If we fail, people die." But the filming continued. NBC saw a story that would captivate American audiences. Young idealists literally digging for freedom beneath the Iron Curtain. It was made for television. By April 1963, after 7 months of digging, they'd covered about 120 meters. They were close. Just 25 more meters to reach the target building in East Berlin. Then disaster struck again. A digger broke through into a storm drain, flooding the tunnel with sewage and water. The stench was unbearable. Worse, the structural integrity was compromised. Sections of the tunnel threatened to collapse. They had to make a choice: abandon the tunnel or risk everything to continue. They voted. The decision was unanimous: continue. They pumped out the water, reinforced the damaged sections with additional timber supports, and kept digging. But now they were racing against time. The longer the project took, the greater the chance of discovery. In East Berlin, Spina's sister and other potential escapees were getting nervous. The Stasi was running periodic sweeps of border areas, checking basements, questioning residents about unusual activities. Several people originally planning to escape got cold feet and backed out, fearing it was a Stasi trap. The tunnelers had to be cautious about who they told. Each person informed was a potential security breach. They settled on a core group of about 30 people initially, families and friends they absolutely trusted. By September 1964, after 2 full years of planning and digging, the tunnel finally reached the target location. Using a small pneumatic drill, They carefully broke through into the basement of Schönholzerstraße 7 in East Berlin. They'd made it. The tunnel was complete. Now came the dangerous part, getting people through. The escape was scheduled for October 4, 1964. Word was quietly spread to the selected escapees through a network of trusted contacts. The message was simple: be at the building at the specified time, bring nothing that would arouse suspicion, and be ready to crawl through 145 meters of dark, narrow tunnel to freedom. The risk for the escapees was enormous. If caught attempting to flee, they'd face years in prison. Their families would be punished. Their careers would be destroyed. But the alternative, spending their entire lives trapped behind the wall, was worse. On the evening of October 3rd, the first group began arriving at Schönholzerstraße 7. They entered the building in small groups, trying not to attract attention. In the basement, they found the tunnel entrance, a dark hole in the floor, barely wide enough to fit through. At the other end, in West Berlin, the tunnelers waited nervously. They'd set up a signal system. A tug on a rope meant send the next person. 2 tugs meant stop problem. 3 tugs meant guards discovered us, run. The first person to crawl through was a young woman with a baby. She had to do it alone. The tunnel was too narrow for anyone to help her. She tied her infant to her back and crawled forward into the darkness on her belly, pulling herself along with her elbows through mud and water. It took her 45 minutes to traverse the 145 meters. When she emerged in West Berlin, covered in filth, gasping for air, clutching her crying baby, the tunnelers wanted to cheer. But they had to stay quiet. There were dozens more coming. One by one they came through. Young couples, elderly grandparents, teenagers, families with children. Each made the harrowing crawl through the claustrophobic tunnel, some panicking halfway through, others pushing forward with grim determination. Among them was Hasso Herschel's girlfriend, who'd been waiting 2 years for this moment. When she emerged from the tunnel, mud-covered and exhausted, Herschel was there to pull her out. They embraced, both crying, as NBC cameras captured the reunion. The operation continued through the night. 29 people made it through that first night without incident. The tunnelers decided to risk a second night, bringing through more people. October 4th saw another 28 people escape, bringing the total to 57. But on this second night, something went wrong. One of the escapees panicked in the tunnel. A middle-aged man, overcome with claustrophobia, began screaming and thrashing, blocking the passage. The people behind him couldn't move forward. The people ahead couldn't help him. The entire operation threatened to collapse into chaos. In West Berlin, the tunnelers heard the commotion echoing through the passage. They knew the screams could alert border guards above. Several diggers crawled into the tunnel to try to calm the man down, a desperate effort in the cramped space. Meanwhile, in East Berlin, an informant had noticed unusual activity around Schönholzerstraße 7. They alerted the Stasi. Border guards were dispatched to investigate. The tunnelers in West Berlin got a warning message from their lookout in the east. "Guards coming. Get everyone out now." They pulled the panicking man through by force, dragging him the last meters while he sobbed. The remaining people in East Berlin, realizing guards were approaching, made desperate last-second dashes to the building. Some made it into the tunnel. Others arrived too late and had to flee before guards saw them entering. In total, 57 people escaped through the tunnel before it was discovered. The East German guards found the tunnel on October 5, 1964, just hours after the last escapee made it through. The discovery sparked a security panic in East Berlin. How had such a large tunnel been dug without detection? How many people had escaped? Were there other tunnels? The Stasi launched a massive investigation, interrogating hundreds of residents, tearing up basements throughout the border zone. Several people who'd been planning to escape, but hadn't made it through in time, were arrested based on suspicions. Some served years in prison for attempted flight from the Republic, even though they never made it to the tunnel. In West Berlin, the escapees and tunnelers celebrated, but quietly. They'd succeeded beyond their wildest hopes. 57 people freed. But they also mourned those who hadn't made it, those who'd been caught, and those still trapped behind the wall. NBC's documentary about the tunnel, titled The Tunnel, aired in December 1964. It was a sensation. Americans watched in fascination as the story unfolded. Young idealists digging for months, the desperate crawl through darkness, the emotional reunions in West Berlin. The documentary won 3 Emmy Awards and showed millions of Americans the human cost of the Berlin Wall. It put faces and names to the abstract concept of Cold War division. These weren't propaganda figures. They were real people risking everything for freedom. But the documentary also had consequences. The East German government was humiliated by the broadcast. How could Western students dig a tunnel under their supposedly secure border? It made the wall look penetrable, the guards look incompetent, and the regime look weak. The Stasi response was brutal. They increased security along the wall, installed seismic sensors to detect digging, and conducted regular basement inspections throughout the border zone. Future tunnel attempts would be much harder. They also arrested and tried several people in absentia who'd helped organize the tunnel from the west. Luigi Spina, Joachim Rudolph, and others were convicted of human trafficking and sentenced to prison terms they'd serve if they ever set foot in East Germany. None of them cared. They'd succeeded. 57 people were free. The individual stories of the escapees reveal why the tunnel mattered so much. One couple had been separated for 3 years by the wall. The husband lived in West Berlin, the wife in East Berlin. They'd been dating when the wall went up and suddenly couldn't see each other. They communicated through letters smuggled across the border, planning their wedding for the day they could reunite. The tunnel made that possible. They married in West Berlin 2 weeks after her escape. A grandmother crawled through the tunnel at age 67, determined to see her grandchildren in the West before she died. The journey nearly killed her. She had a mild heart attack halfway through and had to be dragged the rest of the way. But she made it. She lived another 20 years, long enough to see the wall fall and Germany reunified. A teenage boy escaped with his mother, leaving his father behind. His father had refused to come, fearing it was too dangerous. The boy didn't see his father again until 1989, 25 years later, when the wall finally fell. "I understood why he stayed," the man said in an interview years later. "But I never forgave him for choosing safety over family." These weren't heroic freedom fighters or political dissidents. They were ordinary people who wanted to live near their families, pursue their careers, and have the basic freedom to travel and speak without state surveillance. The tunnel gave them that chance. Luigi Spina, the physics student who'd started it all because of his sister's letter, never completed his degree. The tunnel project consumed 2 years of his life and all his energy. When it was over, he was emotionally and financially exhausted. "Was it worth it?" an interviewer asked him in 1965. Spina thought about it for a long moment. "I see my sister every week now. We have coffee, we talk. She's free. So yes, it was worth it." The tunnel itself became a Cold War legend, inspiring other tunnel attempts. Over the next decade, approximately 70 tunnels were dug under the Berlin Wall. Many failed. Some succeeded in bringing out small numbers of people. None matched the scale of the 1964 tunnel's success. The East German government tried to downplay the escapes, claiming the tunnelers were criminals and smugglers, not idealists. But the evidence was clear. These were students and workers who'd risked everything to help strangers escape tyranny. Modern historians studying the tunnel have noted something interesting. The escapees weren't predominantly political dissidents or people in danger. Most were ordinary citizens who simply wanted to reunite with family or pursue opportunities unavailable in the East. This terrified the East German regime more than political opposition ever could. If ordinary people, loyal citizens, party members, workers, were willing to risk their lives to leave, what did that say about the system? The tunnel proved that the wall wasn't keeping enemies out, it was keeping citizens in. The tunnelers faced no punishment in West Berlin. What they'd done was technically illegal, digging under a sovereign border without permission, but West German authorities looked the other way. In the propaganda war of the Cold War, Helping people escape communist tyranny was good publicity. Several of the tunnelers became minor celebrities. They gave lectures, wrote memoirs, and advised other escape groups. But the fame was uncomfortable for many. "We weren't heroes," Joachim Rudolph said years later. "We were just people who couldn't stand seeing families separated." The Berlin Wall stood for 28 years, from 1961 to 1989. During that time, at least 140 people were killed trying to cross it. Thousands more were imprisoned for attempted escape. The wall divided families, ruined lives, and stood as the physical embodiment of Cold War division. When the wall finally fell on November 9, 1989, many of the original tunnel diggers returned to Berlin for the celebration. They stood at Bernauer Straße, where their tunnel had started 25 years earlier, and watched as people freely crossed what had been a death zone. Luigi Spina was there, now 48 years old. A reporter asked him what he felt watching the wall come down. "I feel vindicated," Spina said. "In 1962, people thought we were crazy. They said the wall would stand forever, that the division was permanent. But we knew, if you want something badly enough, if you're willing to work hard enough, you can dig through any obstacle." The reporter pressed. "But it took 27 years for the wall to fall. Does that mean your tunnel didn't matter?" Spina smiled. "Ask the 57 people who didn't have to wait 27 years. Ask them if it mattered." Today, there's a small memorial at Bernauer Straße marking the location of several famous tunnels, including the 1964 escape. Visitors can see photographs, read testimonials from escapees, and watch documentary footage of the tunnels being dug. The memorial includes a guest book where visitors leave comments. One entry, written in German by someone who identified themselves as daughter of escapee 32, reads, "My mother crawled through this tunnel pregnant with me. I was born free in West Berlin 3 months later. I owe my life to the brave people who dug this passage. I owe everything to their courage." That's the real legacy of the Berlin Tunnel, not the geopolitical implications or the Cold War propaganda value, but the individual lives changed, the families reunited, the futures made possible. 57 people crawled through 145 meters of darkness to reach freedom. Behind them, they left a totalitarian state that would eventually crumble, unable to sustain itself when its citizens wanted desperately to leave. Ahead of them was an uncertain future in a divided city, but it was a future they chose for themselves, rather than one imposed by armed guards and concrete walls. And that made all the difference. The tunnel is long gone now, collapsed and filled in decades ago, but its story remains, a testament to what ordinary people can accomplish when they refuse to accept the walls that others build to contain them. Luigi Spina passed away in 2009. His obituary mentioned his physics research and his teaching career, but the headline read, "Student who dug Freedom Tunnel dies at 68. That's how he wanted to be remembered, not for his academic achievements or his professional success, but for 2 years spent in darkness, digging through mud and water to help strangers escape tyranny. His sister, the one whose letter started everything, attended his funeral. She stood at the podium and said simply, "My brother gave me my life back." He gave 56 others their lives back. That's all that needs to be said. The 1964 Berlin Tunnel proved something that totalitarian governments have always feared. Walls only work if people accept them. If people are willing to dig, to climb, to swim, to risk everything, no wall is strong enough to contain the human desire for freedom. The East German government built their wall higher, deeper, more secure. They added sensors, guard towers, attack dogs, and shoot-to-kill orders. But people kept trying to escape, because the wall was never really about concrete and barbed wire. It was about the choice between freedom and captivity. And given that choice, people will always find a way to dig toward freedom, even if it takes 2 years, even if the tunnel is barely wide enough to crawl through, even if discovery means prison or death. That's the lesson of the Berlin Tunnel. That's why 57 people risking everything to crawl through darkness matters more than any Cold War summit or diplomatic agreement. Because in the end, freedom isn't about treaties or ideologies. It's about individual human beings making the desperate, dangerous choice to crawl towards something better, even when every authority tells them to stay put and accept their fate. The tunnel diggers understood this. The escapees understood this. And now you understand it too. Sometimes the most important acts of resistance aren't grand political statements. Sometimes they're just students with shovels, digging toward hope in the darkness, one bucket of dirt at a time.